Guys, I can't take it anymore. I'm overwhelmed with the amount of winning. The Department of Governmental Efficiency might be more efficient than any of us predicted, and certainly more efficient than any governmental department. Less than a month in, DOGE has identified its first target for scrutiny, USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. And the reaction from DC to pausing this agency's programs and letting go of much of its staff went about as you'd expect.
No one elected Elon Musk to nothing.
What we not gonna do is stand around while they pull this bull.
We will see you in the courts, in Congress, in the streets. Elon Musk is a Nazi nutball baby.
But Americans aren't exactly buying the fear-mongering.
Stop the madness!
In fact, it seems like many of us are waking up to the harsh reality that our government is not what we thought it was. But there is one person who tried to warn us many years ago. So we have a lot to get into today. Namely, why is DOGE taking on USAID first? What was it funding? Is it really a rebranded, glamorized CIA? In this video, we will only scratch the surface of the USAID iceberg and the corruption that lies beneath. But trust me, you will leave this video completely DOGE-pilled. As a disclaimer, researching this video was a teeny bit overwhelming. Every time I pulled a thread, a gigantic crater of a rabbit hole appeared. And so my ask to you is, if I leave something out, and I will, put it in the comments. Let's information gather together as a community. And with that being said, let's get into it. USAID began in 1961 under President John F. Kennedy, but its roots go back to the Marshall Plan, a program that helped rebuild Europe after World War II. As the US began dumping money into Europe, countries around the world were like, hey, that's a lot of moolah you got there. You mind if I get some? And the US, who is now gearing up for an international battle against communism, said, that's a great idea. President Harry S. Truman, creator of the 4-Point Program, believed that US funding could prevent countries from falling into the Soviet orbit, saying, in countries where the choice between communist totalitarianism and the free way of life is in the balance, this program can tip the scales towards the wax of freedom. But his 4-Point Program ended up being kind of a flop. It wasn't until Kennedy that this idea of consolidating relief efforts and non-military international spending culminated in USAID. Over the decades, USAID's priorities shifted. In the 60s, it was focused on economic development. In the 70s, we moved into more humanitarian kinds of aid, such as food and healthcare. We also dove into some weird territory with population control. Then, in the 80s, priorities shifted back to economic development and aiding our fight against communism. This is when the National Endowment for Democracy was created, but we'll get into more of that later. And in the 90s, USAID really pushed some boundaries and began instituting sweeping reforms, entering countries hostile to the US and promoting democracy. The 2000s were quite heavily focused on Afghanistan and other war-torn US-occupied Middle Eastern countries. And recently, USAID's mission was to promote American prosperity through investments that expand markets for US exports and uplift stable, resilient, and democratic nations. Now, USAID is involved in over 100 countries and employs over 9,000 people until Elon Musk and his team at DOGE showed up, kicked the door down, and started asking questions about where its $32.4 billion budget was being spent. So why target USAID? Well, let's talk about what USAID is actually doing with our money. Two words came up constantly as I researched this video: democracy and disinformation. But let's tackle one at a time. Democracy has become a polarizing issue within the US, but we've been doing this whole promoting democracy on the world stage thing for a very long time. And we've done that through overt military intervention, covert CIA operations, and funding through groups like USAID and the NED. The National Endowment for Democracy is a quasi-autonomous NGO that receives money from Congress through USAID. And they promote democracy through funding election integrity efforts, independent journalism, youth efforts, and so on. Doesn't sound so bad, right? But it's been claimed that the NED was born to replicate CIA efforts after the CIA was found covertly funding regime change and uprisings abroad. Uh-oh. In 1991, the Washington Post published a story called Innocents Abroad, The New World of Spyless Coups, which claimed that the era of CIA covert operations was over and being replaced by overt operations. David Ignatius wrote, "The sugar daddy of overt operations has been the National Endowment for Democracy." Here's Philip Agee, a former CIA officer, saying the exact same thing.
Instead of having just the CIA going around behind the scenes and trying to manipulate the process secretly by inserting money here and instructions there and so forth, they have now a sidekick, which is this National Endowment for Democracy, NED.
And he gives an example of how the NED used conduit organizations in Nicaragua to support opposition to the regime.
And in the Nicaraguan elections of 1990, I believe the figure was something like 12.5 million that went from the National Endowment for Democracy through these conduits to the UNO political movement there.
Now, Nicaragua is not the only place this happened. In Haiti, USAID funded the political training of 600 Haitians opposed to the sitting president. This was in direct violation of the US's foreign policy towards Haiti and caused problems with the US embassy there. USAID also financially backed the Orange Revolution, which, much to the chagrin of Russia, led to the election of Viktor Yushchenko back in 2004. And we have been financially involved in Ukraine ever since. We've been involved in many other regime change efforts, including during the Arab Spring and color revolutions outside of Ukraine, such as the Rose Revolution in Georgia. Our democracy efforts may not sound terrible to those more hawkish on foreign policy. USAID was founded with the goal to promote our foreign policy interests, but sometimes it violates our own foreign policy. And in my opinion, this goes beyond soft power, which I take to mean uplifting the economic situation in foreign countries so they're more allied with the US, and veers into violating the sovereignty of foreign nations. I mean, if we believe Russian interference in foreign elections represents an existential threat to democracy, does our involvement not constitute the same? Romania, for example, is a country that quite literally canceled its elections while crying Russian disinformation and foreign interference because they believe Russia bought support for a candidate on TikTok. And speaking of disinformation, USAID has been funding the censorship industrial complex through its program CEPS, the Consortium for Elections and Political Process Strengthening. A USAID disinformation primer called for governments, tech companies, and other organizations like educational ministries to tackle disinformation. And once you hear their recommendations, a lot of the tech censorship we've been dealing with will start to make sense. They recommend censorship efforts on tech platforms, promoted fact-checking, pre-bunking, boosted strategy where advertisers were targeted and asked to pull funding from unsavory sources. And the primer warned of online forums and gaming sites where conspiracy theories might be supporting interpretations of the world that differ from mainstream sources.
We know we're under attack! We know it!
Oh gosh, what a horror, a different worldview. This cannot stand. The report also bemoans the loss of faith in traditional media. What they mean is loss of faith in media funded by USAID, perhaps because it disables their ability to control the narrative and determine what the truth is. During my research, the funniest thing happened. Traditional media sources failed to report much of the information we've discussed in this video. Fact-checking was a nightmare, let me tell you. CEPS also removed all of their information about their countering disinformation programs. Isn't that interesting? What is considered disinformation is, well, I guess it's up to a group of unelected, overpaid hall monitors and our trusty international media apparatus, who we've been teaching school children from a young age to trust exclusively. Let's talk about the BBC. Despite the British government going, "Oi, you got a license for that," every time a Brit turns on the telly, USAID was still the second largest funder last year. Why? A left-wing journal in Argentina called Revista Anfibia tweeted this when USAID freezes were announced. Did you know that Trump froze the funds he provides to international cooperation and that many media outlets and civil society organizations lost funding? This week, Anfibia lost a significant percentage of its budget. Over in Poland, as soon as cuts were announced, several left-wing Polish news sites cried broke and begged their readers to step up and support them. The same happened in Ukraine. These are outlets pushing values of the American left in foreign countries, which, to be frank, I'm not so sure they want this either. When I shared a screenshot on X, my Argentine friends thanked the US for pulling this alleged funding because they are tired of seeing certain media outlets propped up by governments, foreign and domestic, which do not represent the interests of the people. And former US Treasury Chief Larry Summers claimed, "Someone from a developing country said to me, 'What we get from China is an airport. What we get from the United States is a lecture.'" Has the US foreign policy apparatus turned into a finger-wagging HR department? Is that what we've become on the world stage? Nayib Bukele, president in El Salvador, tweeted in light of the USAID cuts, "Most governments don't want USAID funds flowing into their countries because they understand where much of that money actually ends up. At best, maybe 10% of the money reaches real projects that help people in need. There are such cases, but the rest is used to fuel dissent, finance protests, and undermine administrations that refuse to align with the globalist agenda." He's not wrong about this. And even of that nebulous 10% that reaches people in need, I would argue a lot of it traps poor countries in a cycle of dependency where local economies are not able to rise to meet the needs of their communities because the US government is taking care of it. And this brings us to our rapid fire section. Here are just a few things the US government has been funding with your taxpayer dollars through USAID. But may I first issue a trigger warning? This content may be upsetting to some listeners. Viewer discretion is advised. Reading directly from the White House website. $70,000 for production of a DEI musical in Ireland. $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia. $2 million for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala. Hundreds of thousands of dollars for a nonprofit linked to designated terrorist organizations, even after an inspector general launched an investigation. Millions to EcoHealth Alliance, which was involved in research at the Wuhan lab. Hundreds of thousands of meals that went to Al-Qaeda affiliated fighters in Syria. Hundreds of millions of dollars to fund irrigation canals, farming equipment, and even fertilizer used to support the unprecedented poppy cultivation and heroin production in Afghanistan, benefiting the Taliban. My friends, what in the This is where your taxpayer money is going. Stolen from you and doled out courtesy of the United States federal government. And while USAID has congressional oversight, this has not been an effective mechanism for change. In a Senate hearing, Senator Rand Paul revealed that he had submitted a request for information from USAID regarding potential funding of the coronavirus that destroyed the entire world.
Look, you're right. It ended in 2019. When did the virus come about? In about 2019. Some of the research proposals that came about in 2018 were Wuhan Institute of Virology asking for money to create a virus with a furin cleavage site in it, a coronavirus, a SARS-like virus with a furin cleavage site. That's exactly what COVID turned out to be.
But weirdly enough, USAID, which is subject to review by the US Senate, whose records on this funding were not classified, said no.
And we want to read the grants to find out what they were doing and whether the research was dangerous or not. The response I got from your agency was USAID will not be providing any documents at this time. They're just unwilling to give documents on scientific grant proposal. We're paying for it. They're asking for $745 million more in money and we get no response.
Is anyone else uncomfortable? I'm uncomfortable. What else are we hiding? These are shady dealings. And to be honest, as I was researching this video, I ran into a frustrating series of walls and 404, this webpage is no longer active from USAID to NED and the programs they've been funding. It seems they have taken serious measures to obfuscate what they've actually been spending money on and the ideological leanings of their organizations. We have on record a USAID employee admitting to obfuscation.
DOGE was in the building. We took down our pride flags. I took out any books I felt would be incriminating. No one was talking. We heard they started taking transcripts automatically of all of our Google Meets. They unplugged the news in the little kitchen galleys. It didn't feel good. And then Saturday, all of the websites went down, and then I lost complete access to my computer.
I understand the resistance to change and feeling like this unstoppable force is coming, changing the status quo and digging up any nefarious information they can to pin you with something. I understand that feeling because that's what the bloated, ideologically captured US government has been doing to civilians and organizations for a very long time. It must feel like looking in the mirror. Let us not forget, just a few years ago, the government approved funding for 87,000 new IRS agents to go after and target American civilians for not coughing up enough money. And the reason we don't feel bad for the administrators in all of this is because it feels like for the first time in forever, the odds have actually flipped in favor of the American people, which is how it should be. The government works for us, not the other way around. And I'm not going to be fooled by all of the politicians who are scrambling to whip Americans into hysteria about US aid programs. My generation can't afford to buy homes. We're not having kids. Every time I walk outside, I see a fellow citizen passed out on the sidewalk or screaming at bypassers in a state of drug-induced psychosis. You're telling me that my money should be going to the other side of the world to fund democracy programs and disinformation training for journalists and tech companies so they can learn how to censor me? No, I'm not buying what you're selling, and I'm definitely not picking up what you're putting down. When I decided to make this video, it was going to be about why help hurts, why a constant drip of foreign aid actually harms the economies of nations abroad. And I will leave resources for you to read in the description if that's something that interests you. But as we have uncovered more and more abuse and fraud and waste this week, I needed to focus on why these programs first deserve scrutiny. USAID represents less than 1% of federal spending. I've heard this mentioned as a gotcha against DOGE, but to me, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there is so much more. The waste and fraud goes so far beyond what you and I can even conjure up in our imaginations. It is frustrating to watch politicians try to get us to advocate against our own interests. I want Elon Musk to continue to identify and root out this waste. I have more in common with him, despite him being a billionaire, than I do with the corrupt beneficiaries of the USAID racket. I resent that politicians have been trying to divide us along race, class, and gender lines when it's fairly obvious to me that the real us versus them is the taxpayers and those robbing us blind and abusing our money. I'll leave you with this quote from Murray Rothbard. Only the state obtains its revenue by coercion. That coercion is known as taxation. Taxation is theft, purely and simply, even though it is theft on a grand and colossal scale, which no acknowledged criminals could hope to match. If you like this video, please subscribe. We are almost to 10,000 subscribers. I love doing this for you, and I hope every time you watch a video of mine, you learn something new or put the pieces together or feel like someone else gets it. If you're new here, leave a comment. Tell me how you found the video. If you disagree with the conclusions I came to, that's okay. Let's chat about it in the comments. And lastly, if you really like the video, share it with friends, family, or on Twitter. I can't wait to see you guys in the next one. Ciao.